Kia ora, greetings to everyone. E aku rangatira, nō te ti, nō te tā, ko hui hui mai I tēnei wā, nau mai ki Education New Zealand, mana pau ki te ao, Kōrerorero. So ladies and gentlemen from around the world, wherever you are, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And to our speakers, kia ora, mare mare, iate, on behalf of Education New Zealand, mana pau ki te ao, and our event partner, the Chronicle, welcome. I welcome you. My name is Carl Wixon. I'm the Kaitohu Mātua Māori, or Chief Māori Advisor for Education New Zealand, mana pau ki te ao, and it is both my honour and privilege to extend a very warm welcome to all distinguished guests who have gathered today for this special edition of our Kōrerorero series of conversations that matter, made possible today with the support of the Chronicle. Today I'm honoured to introduce and shortly hand over to Dr. Ella Henry of the Ngāti Kahu, Ngāti Kuri and Te Rarawa people, who will lead the conversation today, pose some questions and challenges, and no doubt, hopefully share some of her own wisdom in the middle. So here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, Ella is amongst an elite group of leaders and change makers, I'll say. We occasionally refer to as Indigi Jedi. So arguably though, if we're Indigi Jedi, Ella's like Yoda. So absolutely awesome to have Ella and all of our illustrious speakers with us today. And Ella is far from alone as a strong Māori woman leader. In fact, when I look back at my own career of spanning about 30 years, actually the most influential and supportive people in my journey have all been our Indigenous women leaders. Some of those who have passed, such as the late Ka Daniels, Alva Kappa, Maina Mackenzie, all future makers and game changers. So I come from a southern tribal matriarchy of Ngaitahu and Ka Te Mamo and Waitaha, amongst others. In our carved meeting house, Te Rau Aroha, the carved meeting house of our ancestors, we have carved depictions of all of our key ancestors, and in our house, they are all women. So they are the founding mothers from whom we all descend. And I happen to sit in a tribe who is chaired by Lisa Tūmahai and led with strength and care by our CEO, Arihia Bennett, who I've had the pleasure of working alongside. So I'm honoured today to pass the talking stick over to our Indigenous women to lead us all with their ideas and their wisdom. Looking forward to it. Before I do, a couple of housekeeping matters for our Zoom room. So closed captions will be on, as well as interpretation in Spanish and Portuguese. Please find those buttons at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you haven't found them yet, they'll be there somewhere. This session also is going to be recorded. So a link will be sent out to those who have registered a few days after the session, so you can play back and pick up that gem you missed. And also through the session, there will be the opportunity for some Q&A, some questions and answers. So if you want to ask a question, please use the Q&A box. Again, they won't be fielding questions from the chat box. Use the Q&A box. I would like now, before we open further, to open with a karakia or ritual incantation in the Indigenous language of Aotearoa, New Zealand, to call upon the vitality, energy and essence of our universe to infuse and enrich us all, and that we connect and bind together today with each other and the spirit of our ancestors. Tūtaua mai I runga, tūtaua mai I raro, tūtaua mai I roto, tūtaua mai I waho. A kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora ki te katoa, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. Tēnā koe, Ella, tuku au te rākau kōrero ki a koe e tuahine. I now hand the talking stick to Dr. Ella Henry.
Kia ora. Ngā mihi nui ki a koe e Carl. And I begin first by thanking our first speaker first for your glowing introduction, thank you, but also for laying the foundation for the dialogue. So beginning is in our culture, all discussion, all debates by acknowledging the spiritual realm, by communicating with our ancestors who have passed on, lays the foundation for the conversation that we are about to have. And I believe this is something unique and distinctive that all Indigenous peoples share, because of our intimate connection with our past as a foundation for moving forward. So thank you, Carl, for that. Thank you also to the organisers of this gathering for the opportunity to meet these extraordinary women and share conversation with them. I'd like to use this opportunity to briefly introduce each of the three speakers that you are very fortunate to be listening to today, and to begin the discussion with the first question relating specifically to Indigenous education. So if I can begin, I'm going to ask first Rachel Petero, who is a Māori Indigenous entrepreneur, consultant, cultural advisor, and what we call in our culture a wahine toa, a proud woman warrior. And then we'll be followed by Carrie Billy, a Navajo woman, president and CEO of the American Indian Higher Education Consortium. And finally, today we'll be introducing you to Alina Namuncura, who's a lecturer in intercultural education for the elementary school in Mapuche context at the Universidad Católica de Temuco. So those are the three speakers that we are very, very pleased to be able to introduce you to today. I'd like to begin first by asking you, Rachel, and all of you, but the same question. From your field of expertise, what is the greatest challenge facing the women of your community today? And do you see international education as a way of facing that challenge, Rachel? Kia ora.
Tēnā koe ala ai, tēnei te mihi kia koe, te tuakana e te tuahine. Me koe e kao, ko te mihi, ko te karakia I tēnei ata, ai, tēnā koe e kai karakia. Ai, ko wai ahau, ko Rachel te tiro toku ingoa, no Waikato tauni ahau, ai, tūturu, ko Ngāti Tamoho, ko Ngāti Whawhākia, ko Ngāti Te Ata, ko Ngāti Tāhinga Oku Hapu. So just very briefly introducing you to my whakapapa, my genealogy, my ancestors who all come from the mighty Waikato. So kia ora anyone who has been past or through my region in the North Island, a tēnei te mihi kia koutou. So the question that you ask, Ella, is a big question. Yeah, what is the challenge facing our wahine in our communities today? And from my perspective, Ella, in the work that I am doing, not only in business, but in leadership, it's the connections that we no longer have because of COVID. It is the physical connection that we are so used to being together. And so I say that from a place of knowing and working with our Indigenous Māori Pacifica women here in Aotearoa, but also Māori to my sister in Mapuche. I mean, once very not so long ago, actually, we were connecting physically, weren't we, Alina, in Chile? And to my sister here, Carrie, in North America, just before lockdown in 2020, I flew back from the residents conference, which was in Las Vegas. And so we were physically together as a people. And I know when we are together, magic happens. And so that's what I'm experiencing, Ella. I'm experiencing that need and that want to reconnect safely. And so just coming off everything is done on Zoom at the moment here in Aotearoa and Auckland. We've been locked down for 12 weeks and it will continue, I understand, with some new freedoms. But, you know, that's the thing. That's the thing that I really feel is challenging our communities of Indigenous women. Yes, we are resilient. Yes, we are wahine toa, but there is something about coming together physically, yeah, that really uplifts our wairua, our spiritual connections, our physical connections, our hinengaro, our bringing our different mindsets and thoughts together in a physical environment. So that's what I'd like to share, and to also offer the space, as you said, to our other Indigenous sisters. It's wonderful to be here. Tēnā koutou.
Oh, kia ora. Thank you, Rachel. I wonder if I can turn now to you, Carrie, and your thoughts on this pressing topic around, the greatest challenges facing women in our communities, but how international education might actually offer something in that regard.
My mother's first clan is Anglo, my father's first clan is Bigwater, and my maternal grandfather's clan is the Tobacco people, and my paternal grandfather's clan is the Towering House clan. In this way, I am a Navajo woman. And I want to thank you so much for inviting me to be here. I am honored to be in this circle today. I am Carrie Billy, the president and CEO of AHEC, which is the American Indian Higher Education Consortium. That is the 37 tribal colleges and universities in the United States. And I think when I look at what are the biggest challenges we face as Native women, Indigenous women, there are so many that I could name, health, violence and abuse, our language loss. But I think to sort of encapsulate all of that, I'm going to say sustaining our identity and our sovereignty, both as Indigenous people, tribal people, but also as Native women. So I think it's common that within Indigenous communities, the cultural and societal responsibilities of women are the center of our collective ability to maintain balance and harmony and well-being within the community. And when that's out of balance, everything else falls. So I see that as one of our biggest challenges. And as Rachel said, it's worse due to COVID. So how I think international activities can help, or international education, I'm looking at it from the lens of an Indigenous woman. So I'm looking at it as Indigenous international activity. And I think there's some commonalities that I've found in my international travels and work with other Indigenous people from around the world. And one is our shared connection to place, our place within this earth and then within the larger universe, which is so critically important to all of us. Our connection to community, which is the center of who we are. Our worldview is very similar, and our knowledge creation is both learned and acquired. And I think that's really something that's unique among us as Indigenous people, that spiritual practice and our language are critical to our learning. So when I interact with my peers from non-Indigenous communities around the world, I don't see that. When I interact with people from institutions of higher education in the United States, I don't see that kind of worldview, that recognition. But with other Indigenous people from around the world, we have this shared understanding. It's even more, it's a deeper core tenet that knowledge isn't just learned, it's acquired. And that's the kind of thing that will sustain us. And as this world gets smaller, as we go through more challenges, it's more and more important to be together in that community and to lift each other up. And we can do that, I think, best when we're working with Indigenous women from around the world.
Thank you so much. There was a lot in there. Thank you, Carrie. If I could move now to Alina and your thinking on these topics.
Kia ora, Mari, Pulamien, Taupain, Alina Namuncura, Ronkesin Tainti, Rume, Manumayu, Tamimangel Fiel, Fachil Tramkawun, Kōrerorero mu, Wesasungu Mule, Faupele, Wesasungu Muli, Walmapuple, Fantepu, Kuifi Muka, Ti Estao Langum Fi. Ka kini lamien kini wei chafe Jordan liempe yem female wanyankali ti piuke wanyankali kominchin kochanka sunguta meli inte panki puyi tuun Alemania mapumu chamaninche welu winyotun tani mapu winyotun faupele winyotun walmapupele tani Kimal tain sungun, tain Mapuche sungun. Well, my name is Alina Namuncura, Rodenkirchen. I was born here in Waimapu, in the land of the Mapuche nation. I was born next to Panguipulli in the south. I was then adopted to Germany, but I came back here like 5 years ago, I think. And well, now I'm working, studying. I'm doing all my life here. I'm immersed in my culture, in my Mapuche culture. And well, what Mapuche women are facing, I don't know where to start. Well, we have to face multiple violences against us. But what I see is that we are very resilient, as the Lamien said already. We have to face discrimination on a daily basis. When there's a normal exclusion of women, maybe in jobs, maybe in the public life. But when it comes to indigenous women, this is maybe a double, a triple exclusion, a triple violence against us. And I think now during the pandemic, we had to face it was seen that there is a greater gap that opened for indigenous women, because we do not have sometimes the connectivity, because we are living in a rural area. In the rural area, there are no health supplies, there's no health system working, and everything is still not accessible for indigenous women. So this means there's more exclusion. And I think maybe that education could be, should be, can be, is the key to face all these obstacles, because the education, the international education, can show opportunities, can give us a bigger picture, can empower us. But at the same time, we can look back, because when we are far away, then we can begin to cherish what we need, what we feel. We can cherish our roots, the values maybe of our people, of our Mapuche people. We feel what is missing. We feel maybe where we want to go back to support, to collaborate. So I think even if we are far away, there's always, we always say, we Mapuche, we are never alone. There's always something that is guiding us, that is being at our side. So this has a lot to do with our spirituality, or Fayentun, we call it. And maybe this was what international education can support in our cases. But we are always, or we should always see the roots. We should always see the Fayentun, and we always use the international education as a tool to come back to the communities and to work inside and with the communities.
Thank you all so much. That was so much information in a very brief period of time. But I just to distill before we move on, I think that you raised some critical issues, that international education is very important, particularly for addressing some of the discrimination and the disadvantage that Indigenous communities and populations face, but more specifically Indigenous women. But I also found what came through very strongly from each of you is that whilst Indigenous education is an important vehicle, what is also strengthened by that process is our Indigenous identity. And that our Indigenous identity, our spiritual strength, our spiritual capital, is something that we actually bring to Indigenous education and to each other. And underpinning all of that, I got the sense that all of this is also linked to the revitalization of our land, ownership, our sovereignty, our language, and our culture. So there is an educative, a spiritual, and a political dimension that comes through in each of the aspects that you all face, not just as Indigenous people in these spaces, but more importantly as Indigenous women, because of the unique and distinctive role we have in our communities as women, and the impacts that have come, as you said, Alina, around facing double discrimination as women and as Indigenous women, the long and profound and negative impacts that have accrued because of the colonization of our lands and our cultures by patriarchy, which sees us just as women, but even lesser as Indigenous women. So I think there's a role there for Indigenous education. And if I could drill down a little bit more and come back to you, Alina, to talk about the revitalization of Indigenous language, which you talked about, and how your international educational experiences have prepared you or given you the tools necessary for the kind of work that you're doing in your communities.
Yes, thank you. Well, in my particular case, like I was raised in Germany, my first language is German, and I started to learn a lot of languages and to go back to meet my roots, to get to know my roots. I always had this feeling, and I think it's true, I had to get to know the language, because my education was like this, that through the language you can get closer to the culture, you can understand the culture, you can understand the spirituality of the persons. And so and this was kind of from the back to the front, because first I started to educate myself as a German teacher for students who didn't speak German in Germany. So, and then I thought, well, when I can educate myself in this topic, so I can maybe take this knowledge about how the brain is working, how the process of language acquisition is working. Maybe I can use this to give this back to my language, to the Mapudungun. Our language is called Mapudungun, and this is my this is my life. I think the language, the Mapudungun, is my life. So when I started to teach German, I always had like my book here, and I made some notes. I said, oh, this, I can use this for the Mapudungun. Oh, this is a great activity. But if I haven't been able to learn this, if I haven't been able to study this, or if I haven't been able to be outside of Chile educating myself, I think it would have been a little bit difficult, because this international education, it can open the mind, because you can see the possibilities. Maybe the possibilities here are kind of restricted because there are no examples, because there are no successful examples of bilingualism, for example, or being a multicultural society, and that different societies can live in peace with each other. It's like kind of that, no, this doesn't exist, this can't be. But if you have been into another places, you see, yes, this is possible. And yes, it's possible that a person can speak several languages, that language acquisition is something very good, that when you speak 2, 3, 4 languages, even better. But sometimes you only can see this when you are outside, and when you can have like a bigger picture, and then you can come back and say, yes, it is possible. Let's do this. Let's try it. So my work is here with the language revitalization of the Mapusungum. And I try to show the possibilities how to revitalize the Mapusungum.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. And I such stimulating ideas, because yes, for those who speak multiple languages, they're all journeys. But I think you also hit on that equally important notion that for an Indigenous person to speak our own language is another kind of a gift. It is not just about having multiple languages, which is a wonderful skill. But for me, my language is the only one I can use to speak to my ancestors, to make that spiritual connection that reinforces my identity. So the fact that I speak to you in the language of my colonizer, which is English, means that I have to go on that other journey. And the important role that Indigenous education and language revitalization plays has, I think, also got to be supported by those platforms that are offering, international education. It is not just about taking our students out into the world and giving and introducing them to the world. It is also about funding them to engage in that linguistic revitalization agenda. So thank you. That was a very, very stimulating introduction to that thinking. If I can turn to you now, Dr. Maliek-Carey, a theme that has been running through this conversation has been the added responsibility and additional roadblocks that our women face when it comes to education. I'm really interested in some of the things your organization, and in particular the tribal colleges, have done to combat systematic issues facing your Native Indigenous women and their access to education.
Great. That's a great question. Thank you. And also just let me say thank you, Ella and Alina, for your beautiful, beautiful words and description of those issues. I think it really just points out the importance of international education and working together, because those are issues that we're grappling with, and we have learned so much about sustaining and preserving our own languages by learning from the Maori and other Indigenous people around the world. So just strengthening each other, which is something that we really need to continue to do. When I think about tribal colleges and how they are specifically serving Native people and Native women, I remember the words of one of our great women leaders, Dr. Wilma Mankiller, who said, "Whoever controls the education of our children controls our future." And to me, that sums up what tribal colleges are. There's only one group of institutions in the United States, institutions of higher education, that are controlled by our people. That's tribal colleges and universities. They're chartered and controlled and created by the people who they serve, our tribal nations. No other institutions have that honor or that responsibility. Tribal colleges are place-based institutions born from the land, air, water around them, and by our people in ceremony and prayer and community. And the ceremony and prayer that gave birth to the tribal colleges is the unbreakable cord that binds them to our people and our community. So everything they do centers around that community and people. Tribal colleges work to make education affordable, so very inexpensive. This won't mean a lot to those of you who aren't in the United States, but you can basically get a 4-year degree for about $3,600 or less per year in tuition and fees at a tribal college. That's amazing. So they make it affordable, they make it accessible. Tribal colleges focus on the identity of their students. And one way they do that is by strengthening language and culture. And so language classes are required, native language classes at all tribal colleges. I mentioned earlier teaching from a worldview, which is really critically important. So it makes sense to our students and that helps them to succeed. Culture isn't added to the curriculum, it is the core of the curriculum. Tribal colleges provide holistic support for the students, wraparound support services to the students and also to their families. So a lot of times you'll go into a tribal college and you'll see little kids, babies in the classroom or at the daycare center at the college, but really supporting the whole family. They focus on what the needs of the students and also do things like they engaged in politics. So they're helping develop these women leaders with their political role, providing research, community-based research that's relevant to our women and our families. And lastly, they really work to empower women and provide a safe place for them to educate. I think Alina was talking about the violence. We have that also, but tribal colleges are safe places for women and families to come to learn and grow. So I could go on, but I'll just stop there.
Thank you so much. That's so empowering. And I know something of your organisation and the extraordinary work it does and how it parallels in New Zealand with the work that Māori have been doing over the last 30 years to build our own education system, which, let's be clear, was born out of protest. I mean, we don't have a separate Māori education system in this country because a group of benevolent, middle-aged, middle-class white men said, oh, let's give the natives their own education system. It took protest, it took activism, it took sovereignty warriors to make the space for that to happen. And at the forefront of all of those changes were our women, some of whom Carl mentioned and acknowledged at the beginning, but right through every tribe, there have been women who understood, as you said, those who control the education of our young control the future. And I'd like to think that in this audience that we have to a discussion like this, the non-Indigenous community looks to how it can support our aspirations, how it can empower our desire for self-determination of our education and provide those resources so that all of our organizations can continue to work alongside them without having to justify that our science is real. I mean, there is nothing more irritating for me as a Māori when mainstream science says, oh, we've invented this fabulous cure, which is something my people have been using for 1,000 years. So, you know, there's so many areas of work that we have to justify and fight and struggle. But I am heartened when I see the caliber of the women at the front of those struggles around the world, which leads me, Rachel, to my kōrero with you. And it's around also the importance of linking international education experiences to success in the business world for Indigenous women, because you've made that link between international Indigenous education and entrepreneurial endeavour. I'm very interested in your thoughts in that regard.
Ngā koe, Ella. And yeah, just beautiful to listen to both Carrie and Alina about our reo, our languages, and how they enable and empower us as we move forward, and especially thinking about our young people. So I think just to pick up on one overarching theme that I'm hearing and that I believe in is that international education is even more important now than ever before, because it gives us hope. It gives us hope. It takes us out of this global pandemic mindset that we are stuck in, and it gives us hope to develop ourselves and move forward. So in terms of international education, it is so important. And so linking it to entrepreneurship is definitely something that empowers me. And so I want that for other Indigenous wahine. And I say that because many of you will know Once We're Warriors, and that's an amazing film that many people know globally. But once we were entrepreneurs as well. And I'd like us to remember that. I'd like us to remember that pre-colonization, pre-settlers, we were trading. We were trading goods and services. We were trading our resources. And if you fast forward to where we are now, that is our role also, because that is a place of self-determination for us as Indigenous women, to really be the CEO of our own lives, the CEO and the captain of our own ship, to determine where we are going to go, in life. And so entrepreneurship, I want our Indigenous wahine to not wait for permission to step into this space of entrepreneurship, and to really take that space. Because when I started, and this is going back a few years now, and I stepped out of my corporate role, which was great, it was safe, it had financial stability, but actually I never really felt like I was owning my tino rangatiratanga, my mana motu hake, when I was held to account by others. And so if you think of entrepreneurship as a way to own your own self-determination, your sovereignty, you get to decide. You get to decide how you want to move forward. And so, 11 years in London, amazing, being able to work in that corporate world. But what really shifted my mindset was moving to the Middle East. And the connection to many cultures, a Muslim culture, where absolutely mana motu hake and sovereignty is part of their makeup. And if you are entering into their countries, you need to abide by their rules. And that really changed my mindset about how not only did I want to serve wahine and women, but also how I wanted to serve and support Indigenous women. So I've been on this journey, Ella, to decolonize development and leadership and entrepreneurship. And how we do that is by connecting. And so Mapuche, I connect with a lot of First Nations, and we are building our businesses. We are building it from the ground up, and we are using what is naturally our skill set of creating arts and crafts. And we are doing that even today using e-commerce. And so even within a pandemic, we are able to trade with each other. And so I think, it's about really owning and taking ownership of our birthright, which is, and I know through the mana wahine claim, we can't go through this conversation without having that conversation, Ella, that you are part of. Here we have yourself, Donna Awatere, Ripeka Evans, all leading the way for us as mana wahine to say, no, this is our birthright. You will abide by, and you will come to the table. And so what I'm saying to all of us as Indigenous wahine is that, yes, international education is important, but we also need to pave our own way. And business and entrepreneurship is the way that we can do that. It's a pathway to our sovereignty and our manafu te hake. So kia ora, Ella.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And of course, you're speaking my language. I did my PhD in entrepreneurship because like you, I realized that I come from a culture that has thousands of years history of discovery, of risk-taking, of traversing the Pacific. All of the ingredients of entrepreneurship my people have practiced in the same way that the peoples of Turtle Island and Abya have done the same. Our cultures are thousands of years old. We have been colonized by cultures that are hundreds of years old, but have managed to convince us that we are somehow subservient to them. But we have these extraordinary communities that are putting the self into self-determination. Sovereignty starts with each of us, the role we play, the work we do in our communities, the linkages that we can make. And as you said, Rachel, the process of decolonization. I always think of my life as being an exercise in decolonizing the construction of my mind, which took 60 years for the colonizer to crush me into this little box. And I've spent the last 30 years trying to unpick it. So alongside of the structures of education we use are also the strategies we use to strengthen ourselves with our families. As a mother, I know my most important job is to raise strong Indigenous Māori women for the future. The other stuff is important, but that is also a critical one. But listen, we've come to the point. Thank you so much for your honesty, your candor, your brilliance in sharing, where we have some questions, and I wonder if I can put those to you. We have one from a wonderful young woman called Eri Hapati, young Māori woman who is studying in Massachusetts and is wondering if any of us have any advice for keeping our identity close to us while being so far away from home. And she brings up the idea of spiritual capital as a gift. So I'm going to throw this in there because I'm doing some work on Indigenous networking, research on Indigenous networks around the world, from things as diverse as belonging to the Academy of Management on the one hand and going to a powwow on the other. That any opportunity we have to get together as Indigenous peoples to celebrate our identity enhances our spiritual capital. So if you are a Māori in Massachusetts, find other Indigenous peoples and find some excuse to come together and just celebrate each other. But I'd like to throw this open. Perhaps if we go from Alina to Carrie to Rachel to see if you have any thoughts also for Eri Hapati in Massachusetts. Alina, what's your thoughts?
Yes. In this case, I did exactly what you said, because me living in Germany, I was kind of alone, because where could I find more Mapuche people? Where could I find more knowledge of the culture, of the language? So what I did, I searched, I searched in every European country, and I think just before I went back to Waimapu, to Chile, maybe there were like 5, 10, 15 Mapuche and strong Mapuche women from all over Europe, young, some older, but we're all like one, and we were all like stick together. If one woman knew something, she teaches the other. We did like Skype Mapusungung lessons, because one was in Spain, one in Switzerland, in Belgium, Germany. So we were all over Europe, but we had this one aim. We wanted to get closer to our roots. So this was what I was doing. I searched my people, I found them, and for example, we do celebrate Wichipantu, like the beginning of a new cycle in June. So for this event, Spiritual Event, we gathered together. And this was always like my highlight of the whole year. And this was so much strange for me, so much Newen, we say Newen. Yes, and this was like my survival package I did for myself, to feel good, to feel like, to feel good with myself, with my Indigenous identity, getting to know more. And having women around me who wanted to share their knowledge. So
Fantastic.
This is.
Do you have anything to add to that, Carrie?
Yeah, that was pretty much what I would say also. But the only thing I would add is that there are powwows all over the United States. So there are some great ones in Massachusetts, but also through, because of COVID, we found that tribal colleges are now offering many more courses online. And there is so much that you can engage in online to have that real cultural experience and learning and teaching, whether it's Navajo weaving or language classes, they're online. So I encourage people who want to feel that sense of community to look at some online courses at a tribal college. As I said, they're really affordable. And a lot of them are free, but also just coming together in any way to have that sense of community it is just so critically important, and we're everywhere. So good luck.
What a lovely idea. We are everywhere. And as someone who's had the good fortune of going to a powwow in Six Nations when I was in Canada, I cannot recommend it enough for someone from another Indigenous culture to make connections with the First Nations peoples through their cultural events. And from that, other things, wonderful things grow. What are your thoughts, Rachel?
Hi, tēnā koe. And tēnā koe, Eri Hapete. It's wonderful to hear that you're in Massachusetts. And I would tautoko and support all of that. I would say also you only need one. Yeah, you only need one Indigenous woman to connect with, to create something special and to create something that is unique between you two. And I would also say start something, choose a celebratory day in New Zealand. It might be Waitangi Day, and invite other Māori and Indigenous women to come and celebrate an event, because that's what our networks do, don't they, Ella? Once we start creating those events, and you can do it online, of course, they start to grow momentum, and then next minute, you've got 20, 30 people. So, just start with one if you're looking for someone. And the other thing I would say is exactly what Carrie said. There are some amazing connections into our spirituality in terms of karakia and waiata that you can actually just log into back here and at home in Aotearoa if you're missing that. Yeah. So, happy to support. Look at our wānangas. They've got Te Wānanga Aotearoa. They've got a whole lot of stuff as well. So there's heaps out there. So kia ora, Ella.
Thank you so much. We have, I think, time for one more question, and I think it's a really meaty one that I'm sure you'll all have some opinions. This is someone asking, and beginning, I think, very graciously by asking or saying, please forgive my lack of knowledge on this particular subject, but I'd like to know what we can do as higher education institutions do to support mobility, collaboration of Indigenous students with their peers abroad. And I think that's part of a bigger issue. I just want to throw my 1 minute's thinking into that, because this is something we deal with in universities all the time. How do we uplift the voices of our Māori students? How do we provide, better pathways for Indigenous knowledge in our essentially very Western business school, Western university? And what I am saying continually to the powers that be in my institution is this: learn to let go of your privilege, learn to let go of your power, and walk alongside us as collaborators and as allies, not as white saviors. We've had hundreds of years of that. We've seen it doesn't work for us. It doesn't even work for you. Walk alongside us as allies and collaborators. Share the power, share the privilege, share the resources, because when we are spiritually uplifted, we will take you on that journey too. So that's my thinking, but I would be very interested, and maybe we can go backwards the other way and start with you, Rachel, and Carrie and Alina, and your thoughts.
Kia ora, Ella. I tautoko and support everything that you have said. And I would also add to that I look at our institutions. I'm doing some work with the University of Auckland Business School, and I think about how we can also enable succession of Māori, of Pasifika, into those leadership roles that can then start to change the system. Because our students, our tauira, they need to see people who look like us. They need to for them to have a voice. And when they are constantly seeing people who don't look like us, who don't sound like us, who don't have the humor that we have, who don't get them, then they feel isolated. So I'm talking about really that succession and that pool of talent that is ready to go into those leadership roles, so that the system starts to look and feel like our students, the diversity that we bring into universities. And I know you're a big advocate for that, Ella. So I just add that in terms of the leadership. So when the leadership is aware, then they can do things systematically to support our students to feel like they belong, because a lot of the times they don't feel like they belong in those institutions. So, you know, think about your leadership. Think about who is actually facing off against our tauira, our students, and enable them by getting out of the way. So, kia ora.
What are your thoughts, Carrie?
I think you both have said it beautifully. I would only add maybe you focus on the identity of the students, really intentionally focus on their identity, lifting their identity as an Indigenous, as a Native person, including, you know, one easy way to begin that we encourage all institutions of higher education in the United States to do at all their convenings is do the land acknowledgement, because they are all on Native land. So acknowledge that, be truthful about your history and your stories. So that's just one simple way to support students, but you're bringing them in cohorts. And I think, Ella, as you said, authentic partnerships, real partnerships, not taking advantage of Indigenous people or institutions, but real partnerships, which is very difficult for some institutions to do, but you have to be committed to that. And as Rachel said, starts with leadership.
Alina, some thoughts from you, perhaps?
Yes, I totally agree with all of you. I totally agree. And yes, even when it comes to research, the researcher studying us, but without our participation, the studies they don't have a benefit for our communities. Give a room for Indigenous researchers who know which research we do need, which diagnostic do we need, what do we want to know, what is important for our survival that has to be known and has to be written in books maybe. And the other thing, for the job positions, the higher job positions in the university and all over the state, I think there should be the Indigenous women, Indigenous men. And even when we have Kōrerorero, like we say in Mapusungún, give room for the Indigenous voices, to the Indigenous voices and to the female Indigenous voices. This is important because like we live in the society where we as women and as Indigenous women are like always at last. Even Indigenous men do have more voice than we have. So give a room for Indigenous female voices.
Thank you. I feel like we've taken up some of that room today, that these very powerful Indigenous women's voices are being heard in a much wider platform. And I thank and acknowledge the organisers of this event, the sponsors of this event, for providing this platform. But I also caution them, all of the organisers, all of the sponsors, all of the support people, to remember that we are doing this as allies. We're not the entertainment here to justify your raison d'etre and existence. We are doing this as allies. We are giving up our time to bridge national and cultural and linguistic boundaries, because we all have the same agenda to make the world a better place for our people, for our culture, for our land, which is burning. Our mother, the earth, is burning, and way bigger agenda over and above COVID is what we are doing to our planet. And Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous voices, Indigenous peoples have been saying this for generations, that we have to protect our planet because we are connected to it at a spiritual level. So these big agenda items that we are able to share conversation, and kōrero, the Māori word for discourse, kōrerorero, are really a critical part of moving forward. I look at the time and I see apparently we have 4 minutes left, because then I think something happens like a giant foot comes down from the sky and stops this conversation. So I'd like to just finish with, if each of you has some comment you'd like to make, perhaps we can begin with you, Carrie, as because you're part of the host nation.
Well, thank you. This has been fascinating and such a wonderful, wonderful learning experience for me. You are all mentors and role models for all Indigenous women, so thank you. I think it is important, as Elena said, to give room for women's voices. And also, I think looking back, we learned so much from the women who came before us. And I think it's important to remember, in telling even the story, our histories, that we have to include the voices of women in telling those histories and telling our stories, because too often, not only are Indigenous communities left out, but even when they're included, we often only hear those stories from the Indigenous male perspective. So those masculine tones, we have to have the prism of history told completely. That's by men and women. So I think that's something that really, really important. It has to be reflective and diverse and inclusive for us to move forward into the future, and to address the kinds of things like the climate and land issues, all the challenges we're facing. So again, thank you. Thank you.
Alina, have you some thoughts you'd like to close with?
Yes, first of all, thank you so much, all of you, for being here, for sharing your thoughts. I'm very grateful for this opportunity, and we have to protect Indigenous women, because here we see that most of the community leaders are women who are fighting for the water, for the land as well. But now the situation, the actual situation here is kind of difficult. I don't know if difficult is the right word, because we are now here in the south, in the Mapuche land. We are living in a state of emergency decreed by the government. So we see militaries, the military, the whole day on the streets. This is only because they say that we are the terrorists, that we are this, that we are that. And like a few days ago, there was another Mapuche, a young Mapuche shot. So we are always here in danger. And well, there is so much bias on the media. So it's very difficult to show the other side of the story. So we have to protect Indigenous women, Indigenous men, our society. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alina and Carrie. And any last thoughts from you, Rachel?
Ai, tēnei te mihi ki a koe, Ella, mō tō manaaki mō tō tautoko I tēnei ata. I would add to this, we have to create our own Indigenous narratives as Indigenous women. We need to tell our own stories. Yeah, don't let others tell your story. You need to create it. You need to take your space and really own your narrative, because that's what our ancestors did. They created all those narratives, all those songs, all those waiatas, all those karakia, all those prayers, so that we could pick it up and move with those. And so now it's our turn. Wahine mā, to all the women who are Indigenous, to all our educators, allow us to tell our own stories so we can create our own narrative for our future. So, tēnā koutou, ala.
What a beautiful way to end. We are part of creating our own narrative for our people and for our future. And on that note, I would like to pass to Carl, who I believe has the responsibility for closing out our session. Ngā mihi nunui ki a koutou wahine toa, women warriors of the world. Thank you.
Kia ora, it's been absolutely stimulating after such strong woman voices. It seems a shame that it comes to me at the end. But I just want to say, as an Indigenous man, we walk alongside you. And also, for self-reflection for Indigenous men is making sure we're not subscribers to the patriarchal models that have set the regimes that have established a lot of the platforms for interaction. And that when our people are seeking out that male voice in preference to the Indigenous woman voice, that we too are mindful of that within our own fabrics. So I've really enjoyed listening to the kōrero. There is absolutely no doubt that we strengthen each other and strengthen ourselves through this sort of Indigenous knowledge exchange. When we can act, think and do both tribal and global, we are all the better for it. So with that, I said I will just close with a karakia, an incantation to smooth the way for wherever your voyage takes you from here. Kia hora te mareno, kia whakapapa pounamu te moana, kia tere te kārohi rohi I mua e tōu huarahi. And that incantation just says, may the calm be widespread, may the ocean glisten like jade, and may the shimmer of light dance across your pathway wherever you go to next. Ka kite, see you again. Hei kona.
Auri ora.